Hey everybody, it's Dr. V with the Veterinary Telemedicine Facebook group, and we have an incredible person talking to us today. If you have not heard of her yet, you will. Dr. Ericka Carroll is a veterinarian, an MBA candidate, which is going to be extraordinarily important for what we're talking about today, a diplomat of the ABVP, was an Army veterinarian, and worked in small animal practice for 3 years. So you've kind of seen it all already at this point in your career, which is fantastic. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having
really
me.
excited.
I'm excited to talk with everyone.
So the other thing that you don't have on your resume, but you should, is you're sort of like this Oracle wizard, because you did your MBA thesis on digitalization of the veterinary workspace, which I think if you had probably been talking about that last year, everybody's eyes would glaze over, right? They don't want to talk about that. But then all of a sudden, this happened where like, you need to digitalize things, and then you said, oh, by the way, I've been working on this.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So given the fact that you started this way before it became a necessity, how the heck did you even decide that that was something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, so I think my background is always that big question is how did you get from A to Z? Because it seems like it should be connected, but it's not a direct path. And the whole reason why I went to get my MBA was I saw a lot of opportunity for people to have a real dual perspective to understand good business practices, but also good medicine practices. And what are ways that those two views can come together somewhere in the middle to co-create value. So it's not about looking at what's best for the business, what's best for the medicine, that if you have somebody with a perspective that understands both, that there's definitely ways and situations where it can be a win-win situation. And when I was in clinical practice and when I was doing a lot of operations work in the military, there was always that question in terms of how can we work harder, not harder, how can we work smarter? What are the challenges that we have in the veterinary profession with things like burnout, compassion fatigue, and why are all of these things happening? And I think it comes down to, again, what are ways that we can do what's good for the business, but also good for medicine? And I think that there is a great opportunity to really make our processes in the clinic much more streamlined, much more efficient, take the burden off staff when we look at ways to incorporate digital tools. And when I think about digitalization, it is not disruptive. It's not, oh, everybody should close their clinic, lock their door, and start doing telemedicine. So it shouldn't be this idea that's completely disruptive. It should be something that you look at as an enhancement to what you're doing within your existing workflow. So it shouldn't be that we're reinventing the wheel, was my initial thought process. I also think when you think about digitalization, where do you start? What is your need? There's all these questions that you think of when you're thinking about how do you incorporate digital tools into your practice. And so I really wanted to put myself back into those days when I was that, small animal practitioner, and I was really frustrated with certain processes or certain, communication platforms, or just, the daily friction points I saw, and how were the ways I could overcome those, not only me, but also my clients. And so I really spent some time to look at processes in vet clinics, to look at where we can add in digital touch points, to really strategically create a digital plan. So it's not just about signing up for a tool and hoping it works. It's about thinking about this from a really strategic perspective. Certainly with COVID, the workflow issue became a little bit different than my thesis originally was written.
No, but it's so true. And I think you just sort of outlined this perfect table of contents for all of the important issues that we're seeing. So I graduated in 2002, and we were probably one of the last classes who were still taught about how to manually develop x-rays. And like some people had digital records, but a lot of people didn't. And we were still carrying around the file folders. And so when you think, it sounds like the Flintstone Stone Age, it wasn't really that long ago, but we've already been digital, making all these things digital. So it's not like we haven't already been doing it sort of piecemeal. And I think people, like you said, they're so intimidated. And when they hear I have to do the telemedicine, like they automatically just say, okay, that means I need to do live video, and have forgotten all of these other things in the middle that they should be doing. And then it's not a success, right? Because you just slap on this tool, no idea how to use it. And you haven't set that up to be successful because your team's not trained and they're not sure about how it works. And so I really wanted to kind of get your perspective about how we approach that, because what I found even in the telemedicine group is they know they need to do it, and it's just like like
Yeah.
no clue,
Yeah.
no clue how to implement it. They don't even know where to start. So I would love your perspective about how you do that. Like, where do you begin when you're totally
Right.
overwhelmed?
Yeah.
How do you figure out what those problems are, and then kind of go from there instead of going from the solution and making it work into your
Yeah.
problems?
Exactly, exactly. So I think that during the COVID pandemic right now, our needs and our challenges look very different than they did pre-COVID. And so we have these sort of, I would say, dueling challenges that we want to social distance and keep our employees safe, but we still want to be there for our clients and provide these essential services. We still want to, have our businesses producing revenue so we can continue to employ our staff. And so you become up with all of these challenges that COVID imposes. So I think my first step is always, what is the problem that I'm facing, and what are some workflows and some practical solutions that I can design around the problem I'm facing? So when you think about COVID, like I said, these are some of the things we think about. Maybe we have people who have to employees who have to stay home because their personal situation has changed or they're in an at-risk group. Maybe we have clients that can no longer leave the house. Maybe we have clients that still need that urgent care. So what can a workflow look like that's really maintaining our core focus on why we're going digital? And so I think digitalization should always start with, what is my need? What is my end result? Like, what's my strategy? So when thinking about COVID, I think there's ways, again, to kind of think about a workflow that can address some of these needs. So I think that's what you should always start with, is why am I even wanting to go digital? Like, what is my particular need in this situation?
Yeah, and we see a lot of people, I think, doing a great job. They finally sorted out how to do the curbside drop off. A lot of people are integrating live video and sort of using it that way, where the pet is right there in front of them, but the client's still in the car. So I think they're sort of baby sorting through all of those things. But I think a lot of people are still really, like, the handoffs are confusing as well to people. So I talk to the receptionist, and they have no idea how you get from there to the doctor's on the video. So how do you
Yeah,
assess who does what in that
yeah,
flow?
yeah. I mean, how I really thought about this when I was approaching this problem, and I sort of rethought my thesis after COVID hit, and I thought, what would be my recommendation now, given the situation and the unique needs and problems around the situation? And I think it's really sort of essential to also recognize, why is telemedicine, scary? What are the things we don't know about it? And I think some of the questions that always come up for me is, how do I use it since I can't do a physical exam? Like, what are the cases that I can actually use this for? When are people actually supposed to come back to the clinic? And so that's always a huge hiccup for this.
Yes.
The second part is always, if I have a clinic running, where does the telemedicine fit into the workflow? And so for me, I think a great opportunity right now is to start to experiment with some of these workflows and to really start to
Experiment. That's a scary word.
I know, but I think that this is really an opportunity, because when everything is normal and your clinic is running great, that's not necessarily the time you want to start to experiment. I think the crisis sort of presents this opportunity for experimentation, and I think within that, it also gives us the opportunity to determine what things went well and what things didn't go well. And after the situation's over, what are these things we should retain, and what are the things that we should maybe, rework? And so for me, I think it's a great idea to think about your current workforce and dividing them into these two teams, into a digital care team and into an in-clinic team. That automatically then sort of helps solve this problem of social distancing and keeping our team separate. It allows the opportunity for some of your staff that potentially cannot come to the clinic to be able to still be a contributing member to your workforce. And sort of how a workflow I could imagine looking is, when a client has a concern and they go to make an appointment, just like they would pre-COVID, whether that's through calling the clinic or through online booking or through a portal, however you're doing that, is to interact with the digital care receptionist and really just get a sense in terms of what their concern is, and then to triage that case to the digital care veterinarian, and then allowing that digital care veterinarian to really use their clinical judgment and their expertise to say, within whatever VCPR guidelines are there in your state, yes, this can be addressed with virtual care. No, this can't be addressed with virtual care, or this is something that, you know, potentially doesn't necessarily need a medical intervention at this point in time. So it's really about empowering the veterinarian to be the decision maker, to use their clinical judgment, to use their expertise, rather than saying, oh, here's the 5 conditions we can treat with telemedicine. And it basically is allowing us to do what we do now. I mean, we assess the signalment, we assess the clinical history, we talk with the client about what's been going on, and we make a judgment call based on our professional expertise. You know, now the client is more informed, they have more information, so they automatically see value in this, especially in a situation where maybe they can't come out to the clinic. Another opportunity is if that veterinarian determines, yes, this actually really does need in-clinic care. We need to do an exam, we need to do diagnostics, you know, this would be completely inappropriate to treat with virtual care. Now that client is going into a situation where they're probably going to have a curbside drop off, you know, they're not necessarily going to be able to interact with the team like they would normally there. If that clinic has used that digital care veterinarian to set that in-clinic team up for success, by that I'm saying they've gone over potential differential diagnoses. They've gone over, we may need to do blood work for these and these reasons. We may need to do an x-ray. When that client arrives, there's already a thorough history, a sort of a general plan of what's going to happen, allowing that client to go into the situation informed, and also for that digital care team to really expedite the process of the client being there. So I also think it's a way to set up our in-team clinic for success.
How much trust does there have to be between that digital team and that in-clinic team? Because one of the fears that I hear so much is, yeah, that sounds great, but that, you know, and part of that is just, I think vets are inherently sometimes a little more mistrustful than we need to be, but like, they're going to show up with a plan I don't agree with.
Yeah. And I think that it comes down to communication with the client. I mean, it does come down to, I think it's not going to be like, you're going to show up and you're going to get x-rays, blood work, and this and this and this. It's going to be, you know, I really need to see your pet to make an assessment. That veterinarian is going to do a great job in making that assessment. I think some of the things they may recommend. So I think it really comes down to setting the expectation with the client to be that this is a potential recommendation and not a solid plan moving into it. So I think it just comes down to, again, building that trust, but also realizing that there's some flexibility within this plan.
And, you know, I think one of the points, and I don't know how we hammer this home more, because this has been a conversation and a problem for 10 years. Veterinarians think that my job only has value if I provide a diagnosis. And all of these things that you're talking about, like, you could be that digital veterinarian without a VCPR and do all of those things, right? And what I keep hearing is, well, that's not useful until X happens. And the stuff that you've described, like, those are all the things that set you up for a successful outcome, that conversation and that building and that understanding really comprehensively what's going on. So how is there a way, or do you just sort of, have you seen it in action where we can help people understand, look, you know, you have value in all of this other stuff that you're doing. This is critical information.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. I think, you know, the advent of Google, I think that proves right there that there's tons of value in information. So I think that, you know, clients wouldn't be Googling symptoms and questions if there wasn't just value in information. And I think providing clients that access to information with a person they trust, that there is a huge amount of value in that. I think that becomes even more apparent in COVID, because these clients that maybe, you know, had absolutely zero reservation about coming into the clinic and making an appointment, maybe there is that reservation now. And now, without being able to offer them an alternative solution, we've now created a barrier. And so, you know, I think that it really comes down to what I would let the clients decide if there's if there's value in the information. And I think that there is. Like, there's also, a lot of studies I've come across when I was writing my thesis about what does wellness care look like, and what does a veterinarian perceive as wellness care, and what does a pet owner perceive as wellness care. And if you ask a veterinarian, they say, flea prevention, tick prevention, vaccines, spay, neuter. If you ask a client, they say, I want to make sure my pet's happy. Are they being fed good food? How much exercise should they get? So I think sometimes there is this disconnect, and, being in the field and knowing so much inherently, I think we sometimes just take the information we know inherently for granted, not realizing that there really is value in it.
No, it's so true. So I've been in the online space writing for 10 years. And one of the things that always astonished me, because I was writing for everybody in the world, and then I would have my clinic patients, and I would have a harder time getting the in-clinic people that I was seeing face-to-face to trust me than I would the people that I was writing to. And I'd get all these emails like, my vet said this, and, what do you think? And this idea that we cannot build trust unless we're right there face-to-face in the room is just, it's so backwards. We're completely missing the point.
Yeah. And I think the more barriers we can take down for people to access information, actually the more trust we do get. And then when we do have these in-clinic appointments, which are necessary, that trusted relationship is now stronger, and it, results in that in-clinic time becoming even more productive. And so I think opportunities to build relationships with people by making it convenient for them to do so is the really great potential here when we think about telemedicine and virtual care.
So do you find, because this is another objection that I've heard, if the client's being handed off, then there's going to be a perception on their part that there's not this continuity of care. How does that sort of workflow address that?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, it comes really down to setting client expectation with the digital care appointment. And so I think it's very important to be transparent. I think it's important when the client is calling and interacting with that first touch point or that digital care receptionist. It is important to say, we're going to set you up to talk to Dr. So-and-so. The goal of this is really to understand your concerns, to understand what's going on. We want to protect you from not having to come to the clinic if that's possible. But obviously, we're somewhat limited. And if we think it's really the best for Fluffy or whoever to go to the clinic, we're going to make that recommendation. And again, to protect you and your pet and our staff, we're going to create this continuity with a different person, but we're all in communication with each other. We all know the plan. We all know how this workflow is going. So I think it really just comes down to expectation, management through communication.
So your CSR is trained to know the absolute emergencies, right?
Yep.
Eyeballs falling out, off you go. Don't even, we're not setting up for a virtual visit. So they know those things, and then they set up expectations for the virtual vet. The virtual vet does their visit, and either the client goes in or not. They go in, maybe they see the client. Where does the technician staff fit in? Is there anywhere that they have a role in this digital?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a big opportunity for the technician staff on the digital side is really talking about follow-up care. So if we're triaging a case, or if we're treating something virtually, or even in clinic, really touching base with the client the next day to say, how did this go? Are all of your concerns addressed? Especially, I think, with the virtual care, where there may be that hesitation with that, because again, it isn't sometimes an unexplored space. I think if we know that client is getting a follow-up, text or phone call that next day, so that we can continue to follow that case, that's a huge opportunity to really incorporate technicians onto our virtual care team. With the in-clinic care team, obviously technicians are really our lifeline in keeping us vets afloat in the clinic. So I think just continuing to help us all the ways that they do in extraordinary ways in clinic is still quite essential.
So say, you've been forced into this with COVID, and we spend a lot of time talking about that. Do you foresee people sort of getting into this and then shucking it off after? Like, how do you see this digitalization? Oh, obviously you must see something in
Yeah.
it because you started this whole process before COVID was a thing.
Yeah. And so I think this is, again, I think it's a huge opportunity for us to solve the current problems COVID has imposed on clinics, but I also think it's an opportunity to have a sort of an experimental phase. And so I would really encourage clinics to do some, what I would call after action reviews, to think about what is working, what's not working. Some of the things I would consider measuring are those cases that are getting triaged through that digital care team. What case use has been successfully managed with virtual care? Which ones have wanted or needed to go to the clinic? You know, that way after COVID, you sort of have this running list of like, oh, these are the things that we felt comfortable with treating through virtual care and were successful, and these were the things that weren't. So now when you're moving forward after COVID and not everything's going through a digital triage, you maybe have those handful of cases where it worked very, very well. Another thing I would really talk to is with the client satisfaction surveys. You know, ask your clients, like, how did this go? What were the things that worked well? What were the things that didn't work well? Really get their feedback. So when you're moving forward and you're thinking about maybe some of these things after COVID, you can take their feedback into consideration. Another thing would be payment. That's a big question always, you know,
Yes.
do we charge for the telemedicine consult and the in-clinic consult?
Huge question.
Huge question. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. So I'm not here with all the answers. I think that the opportunity, you know, is for how I would see it would be in my kind of COVID situation to collect payment before the digital triage veterinarian speaks to the client. You know, whether that means then when they show up at the clinic, that credit is applied or not applied, I think that is very much a clinic-based decision. But I also think it now gives us the opportunity to see what is a client's willingness to pay for, you know, advice with just advice. What was the resistance or the acceptance to these pricing models? So it gives us this experiment to sort of think about, how do clients perceive it? How do they like it? What uses have worked, and how does payment work in regard to this?
It's interesting. One of the things that I learned when I was working with Redoxit's advice service is clients, they're not paying for the diagnosis, they're paying to know what to do next. And I thought that was such an important piece of advice. Because it's the same way, you know, I don't even know when I call my doctor and I talk to her, I don't recall whether or not she specifically said that my diagnosis has changed, but she'll tell me, okay, we want to tweak this and do this and do that. Like, these things have value.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, again, it's just being there. It's also just having this letting our clients know, yes, we have all of these challenges, but we are still here for you. And like other industries, we've found ways to adapt and be creative so that we can continue to provide for you and be there for your pet. And I think at the end of the day, that sends a very powerful message.
It's like a badge of honor for veterinarians. We love making stuff up as we go along, right? Isn't that so?
Exactly.
I know how to.
We're the masters at improvising sometimes.
Yeah,
so
I can take care of this with a rubber band.
Exactly.
So, and it's funny because for a group that's so into this like creative problem solving, I also hear a lot of like, I just need you to tell me exactly what to do. And it's frustrating because we can't do that. But there's probably like some very specific steps, right? So even though I can't tell you exactly how to set it up, like I can tell you that you have to figure out, you said like, for example, how am I going to accept payment and when am I going to do that? So what are some other sort of things that you have to have in place before you start doing this?
Yeah. So after you have your team sort of divided, I would try to see, is there the capability for the digital care team to work remotely or not? You know, if you have a medical record system that's electronic, I would say that is a possibility. Some of the things you would need to consider are, what are the tools that I'm going to use for my staff to be able to access phones, email, electronic medical records remotely. And there are services to do all of these things, even if you don't have a cloud-based PIM system. If you know you're on paper records or there's not that opportunity to implement all of these systems, because I understand that takes time and sometimes time is limited in these situations, you know, physically where in the building or my clinic could this team be? How can we keep them separated? How can we keep our team separated? What resources are needed there? So I think it's about those resources. I also think it's just with that team itself, how tech savvy are they? How comfortable are they with some of these systems, and making sure that we address sort of, from a little bit of a change management perspective, what are the barriers for our employees, or what are their concerns? How do they feel about this? Kind of providing that reassurance and that security that, yes, as the clinic leadership, we're there to provide you training or resources or support you in ways that we can. So I think that those are some things that you would have to consider for that team specifically.
And the beauty of that setup is, I think people think, I got to get everybody on board, and there's that one person who's never going to get it. It's like, great. Like, they don't
Yeah,
have to.
exactly.
I don't need everybody on. I just need, like, half of you.
Exactly. And I mean, ideally, you would allow your employees to choose, like, hey, I would say you go into the clinic, say, we have this COVID situation. We need to find a way to adapt. We have to be there for our clients. We want to keep everybody employed in some capacity. So this is going to require us to be creative and really kind of then create your change initiative. Are you you're going to have this digital care team and this in-clinic team, and involve them in the process. Maybe somebody is really tech savvy, or no, like, everything I touch breaks. I want to be on the in-clinic care team. I think if you communicate and involve your team members, you will see how this can be an excited and creative process as we figure it out.
So before you work on getting your clients on board, make sure you get your staff on board. I think that would be amazing. Okay,
Yeah.
so we have all of that set up, and I mean, I love that you have done all this. So thank you for being here. If people want to reach out because they're just so like impressed with all the great stuff you've done, what is the best way to find you?
The best way to find me is either through LinkedIn, or you can email me directly. I can put my email address up.
Yeah,
I actually wrote all of this up in a very long document that outlines everything and actually provides some very detailed recommendations for, steps for change management, for different systems to consider. So I know that this was a kind of a broad overview, but if you're really wanting to drill into the details of it, I definitely have resources available and happy
That's
to
your
chat.
thesis? That's
Pardon me?
awesome. Your thesis, you're making that available to everybody?
I have my thesis on my LinkedIn, but I also wrote a whole piece just on specifically taking information out of my thesis and how it could be applied to COVID situations in clinics. So it's sort of the relevant condensed version.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This has been really super helpful, and we'll see if we can get links to that too in the group.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks
Take care.
again.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye.